Greetings and salutations, everyone. I hope everyone is doing well today. Today I have an awesome lineup of just absolutely terrifying encounters to share with you. Before we get into it though, a couple links. As many of you know, I rely on Patreon, PayPal, channel membership, and the merch to help the channel to continue to grow and go. Links to Patreon, PayPal, and channel membership is in the description below. Merch displayed directly under the video. Also, Dogman Frightening Encounters, Volume 1 through 3, the audiobook versions. They were written and researched by Tom Lyons, narrated and produced by me, Jeff Nadolny. Those audiobooks are available on Audible, Amazon, and iTunes, links to which are also in the description as well. And finally, last but definitely not least, if you'd really like to help support the channel to continue to grow and go, simply subscribe. It doesn't cost a cent. Click that like button, takes half a second. If you don't want to miss out on any of the informative uploads I put out daily, click that bell icon, and folks, please leave a comment. Why? Well, because all these things really do help the channel to continue to grow and go. And folks, they definitely do matter. Now, everyone, I have taken far too much of your time. Let's jump into today's upload, shall we? All right, guys, some very interesting quick news. Just yesterday, 2 days ago, I had the opportunity to meet or receive an email from a young man that lives in the vicinity of Cott County, Tennessee. And he goes out into the woods with his video camera and such. And he wants to talk with me about some very interesting things, Bigfoot, Dogman related. I think sometime this week, when we can get our schedules matched up, I will be doing an interview with him to learn a little more about what he's got, what kind of information he's got out of Tennessee. Tennessee, if there were to be a hotspot, for some reason, Tennessee would be that place for me. My folder on subscriber submitted experiences is the Tennessee is the largest one. Subscriber that reached out, that was his wife reached out. He was a fellow former park ranger and was involved in the search and rescue or search and the little girl that was found torn apart, blamed it on a bear. Cott County, Tennessee, Tony Aaron's, Amber Miller. It's, for me, it's a very hot place, and I'm wondering why. In the news, right around the time of the Cott County case, there was a young woman who was attacked in Tennessee, in a Tennessee park. I don't have the info in front of me right now, so I don't remember the exact location, but she had been walking her dog, and a few people had seen a large dog approach her dog, then stand up bipedally and attack her, trying to pull her into the woods. You've got the two cases of the men that were found in Tennessee in a cave in the same kind of housing development, rural housing development. So, yeah, I think Tennessee is a hot spot. But anyway, I'm looking forward to chatting with him and introducing him to the channel. He's a subscriber, but he really seems like he has some information that really could fit in our puzzle. And I'm looking forward to chatting with him and introducing him to you guys. So let's get into these encounters. Today's first encounter. In May of 2020, the quarantine in my state was at full swing. Being a senior in college, I had to take video classes and do digital homework. The change from in-person education to remote education was drastic. However, I had accustomed pretty well to the new atmosphere of learning and had even developed some recent independent study habits. Nonetheless, I was growing stir-crazy in my dorm. My friend, who we will refer to as Ron, saved the day by telling me about a remote camping area that was about a 45-minute drive away. Fast forward a month of classes and preparations, I was loading some heavy-duty camping gear into my truck as I was expecting some treacherous terrain based off the description my friend had given me. Having previously told my instructors of my absence week in advance, I had no assignments to worry over the next couple of days. I put the folded tent into the passenger seat, checked my pockets for the keys, my wallet, and the essentials. Then, with much excitement, I closed the driver's side door and started my truck. The drive was decently calm and beautiful. The trees were very deep and gorgeous shade of green. The sky was a nice calming blue. I was ecstatic when I drove my truck into the cracked asphalt parking lot. I'd arrived early and thought I had to wait. I went to the information kiosk and asked the lady there if I could get set up. She checked my reservation and gave me the all clear. Everything was going right. It got even better when I got to my camping spot and was able to set up my tent on the first try. I found some pre-cut logs and threw them into my fire pit just to be prepared for the night to come. As I was going back to my fire pit to set up the last of the logs, I smelled something absolutely awful. It didn't take long to find a rotten, fly-covered carcass of a dead deer. I almost gagged at the smell as I looked at the body. With my nose covered, I retreated to my truck and called the kiosk, telling them about the deer. Within a couple of minutes, a ranger came over on an ATV and hauled the carcass onto the bed. He came over to me. I think there may be a wolf or a coyote around because the body had some pretty nasty slashes. Be careful with your stay here, sir. With that command, the ranger got into his ATV and drove away to dispose of the deer. I was a little uneasy at the thought of a predator in the forest, but I wasn't too worried as coyotes and wolves usually stay clear of human. Later, I went back to the main building and showed my fishing license to a person at the desk. After verifying my license, they gave me the okay, and I went back to my truck, grabbed my lightweight canoe and my fishing rod, and went to the nearby river to catch dinner. My first cast was a small bass, which I threw back in as it was too small. I got lucky with the second fish, which was a monster of a bass that would likely hold me over for the next day or two. The day just couldn't get any better, save for the short run-in with the deer carcass, but I had mostly forgotten about that occurrence already. Night quickly came as I prepared the bass and roasted it over the fire. The bass was delicious, and there was some left over, so I put it into a special bag that retained heat and headed to my tent to read and then fall asleep. As I'm reading, I stopped periodically to appreciate everything was going my way. After a while, I finally grew tired, found a decent chapter to stop on, and got into my sleeping bag content. I awoke to a sound of crunching sounds of the bag holding my cooked bass. Thinking it was a predator, I made a loud grunting noise trying to scare the animal away without having to confront it. After I stopped making noises, there were no sounds outside. Not even the crickets were chirping, which was definitely odd. Then I heard this terrible scream. It was so loud and close and so wrong. It didn't sound like anything I had ever heard before or since. It was primal and terrifying. My fight or flight instincts kicked in at the worst moment possible, and I feverishly began rummaging through my various gear to try to find my hunting knife, which I had used to cut the bass. After what seemed like hours of panic-filled searching, I found the knife and went outside to put the animal that made the noise out of its misery. I rapidly unzipped the flap of my tent, quickly grabbing my flashlight that was by the flap, and stepped outside. What I saw will forever haunt me for as long as I live. Before me stood a figure eating the bass that I had just cooked. The movements were so unnatural as it turned to face me. It began creeping towards me, crawling just like a human would. Then it stopped, stood up, joints popping and snapping as it rose over 8 feet tall. On 2 legs, it closed the distance, starting to run. That's when my brain finally started to work again, and I ran as fast as I could away. Using techniques my cross-country buddies taught me, I steadied my breathing as I continued running. I ran for what felt like an indescribably long time before I realized that I still had my hunting knife in my hand. However, when I stopped to put it back into my pocket so I didn't cut myself, the creature screeched in front of me. Wait, I thought, there is no way this thing got in front of me without me noticing. And yet, I saw its seemingly glowing yellow eyes peering at me from behind this large tree. I realized that I could run back to camp, or, if I had enough energy, the main building of the campgrounds. Then, with desperation that I can only be described as primal, I ran. I believe this creature realized what I was doing, because it roared in what I assumed to be rage behind me as I sprinted. I could hear its footsteps as it gained on me, and I tried running harder. I burst into the clearing where my tent was and ran by it, attempting to make it to the main building. I reached the parking lot, and then the footsteps behind me stopped. I was in the area of woods from which I had come, and I could see the 2 yellow orbs looking at me through the thicket. The creature didn't pass the streetlights around the parking lot. I blessed the person who invented streetlights before promptly vomiting into the nearby patch of grass due to overexertion. When I looked up between heaves, its eyes were still watching me. Finally, I was able to calm myself down enough to walk briskly to the main building. Upon being asked what the heck I was doing in the building by the ranger there, I told him that a coyote tore into my food and then chased me to the parking lot before retreating back to my campsite to finish its meal. The ranger and I went back to my campsite, and it was completely destroyed. The cooked bass was gone, my tent had been completely torn apart, and all of my gear lay strewn about. Yeah, the ranger said, definitely looks like a coyote did this. We promptly looked around for anything salvageable and found nothing fixable. He called another ranger to bring a trash can to throw everything away. I slept like a rock in the ranger's cabin that night. The tiredness of running got to me. In the morning, I took a much-needed shower, gladly accepted a refund from the registration building, and headed back to my dorm. Life returned mostly to normal, but I will never forget what I saw that day, for as long as I live. That creature in those woods. Whatever it was not natural. It may look human, but its pale skin and yellow eyes made it seem like it was from hell. Start the day off with a crawler experience. Man, I definitely am not a fan of crawlers. I think I'd much rather. I wouldn't want to be chased by anything, to be honest with you, in the woods, and I don't know anyone who would be, or who would want to be. But if I were to have to see something and possibly have contact with it, it wouldn't be a crawler. Today's second encounter. This experience happened to me in the summer of 2019 while hiking in the Lost Creek Wilderness vicinity of Pike National Forest, Colorado. A friend and I decided to get out of the city for a day hike. It was late afternoon by the time we reached the parking area. We expected to hike to the last 2-hour round trip. It was mostly uphill. About 20 minutes in, we noticed some trees that were bent at odd angles. I pointed them out to my friend and made a joke about Bigfoot. By the time we neared the top of the trail, my friend, who wasn't in the best shape, started feeling winded. We decided to take a water break before reaching the end. The birds were chirping and everything seemed normal. The wind was calm. After 10 minutes or so, I was getting impatient, but she hadn't recovered yet. She told me to go ahead and finish the hike without her and promised to wait in the exact spot on the trail until I came back down. It was the uphill part that was going to get her, and she assured me that she'd be fine walking back down the mountain. According to my GPS, the end of the trail was close, approximately 5 to 10 minutes away. I told her I would take a quick walk to the overlook, snap a few photos of the scenery, and hurry back to meet her and head back down the mountain. It was 5 minutes later, hiking alone, and I was near the overlook. Off to the side of the trail, I noticed some cool rock outcroppings and stopped to take a couple of photos. Then I noticed just how quiet the woods had gotten. I began feeling like I was being watched. The rock outcroppings I thought were so cool a minute ago were now potential hiding spots for a predator. I quickly took my pictures and chickened out on finishing the short hike to the overlook. I turned and started back down the trail where my friend was waiting. The silence followed me, and I kept looking around for the source of my unease, but saw nothing. Minutes later, I heard my friend in the distance shouting my name, and I hurried to meet up with her. As I approached, I could tell something was wrong. Her face was pale and her voice was shaky when she explained that the woods went quiet a few minutes after I left. Then she began seeing movement in the trees a little ways off the trail, and there was also some strange clicking noise where the trees were swaying, a loud noise similar to someone clicking their tongue. She said the movement was at the height taller than a regular person and obviously made by something very heavy, but she couldn't see anything there. Whatever it was, there was no sign of anything strange now, but the woods were still eerily quiet, and the feeling of being watched was still very present. We booked it back down the trail to my car, ignoring the need to take any more breaks. When the parking lot was about 5 minutes away, the birds started singing again, and the normal forest noise returned. When my friend described the clicking sound, it reminded me of a story I heard about a clicking cryptid, kind of thing that cloaks itself like the predator. I don't know. I wonder if anyone has had the similar experience while hiking in the Colorado woods. So, there was actually, and I believe the experience happened in Colorado. I do believe it was Colorado, if I'm not mistaken. A young man worked at a park, national park, and the Native Americans would come in every day and do their religious kind of walk and ceremony, and then come back out. And people had seen this cloaking like creature and clicking, and he had seen it near the guard shack or away from the guard shack. I do believe it was Colorado, if I'm not mistaken. I don't know. All right, so there has been about an hour since the last encounter that I just shared with you. And now, because talking about that cloaking, glimmer-like creature in that experience that I shared, I wanted to find it and share it with you guys. I have shared this before, but I didn't realize that it was in Colorado as well, just like the one that we just heard. So Back in 2012, I was working for a small security company. We were contracted to work at a tourist location called Broadmoor Seven Falls near Colorado Springs in the Cheyenne Mountain Canyon area. I remember shifts being grueling due to the fact that we were in direct sunlight until the afternoon and evening. And on an average shift, we were expected to walk a minimum of 7 to 8 miles between the base of the parking area to the top of the falls. Rarely were we allowed to use the guest elevator for the handicapped or the elderly. The whole park was on a hilly incline, so walking the top down was okay, but bottom up was exhausting. In the evening, near the base of the falls, native Ute or Cheyenne tribal dancers would perform, and we had to monitor the crowds. These falls were frequented by the area tribes for hundreds of years and are still considered spiritual. So, it was the native tribes that pushed for the performances. Since Seven Falls is considered a state park, at the end of the night we would sit at the main entrance into the falls at the bottom of the canyon and monitor the toll booth. During the weekends and holidays, we were out there until 3 a.m. On several occasions, when waiting for the end of my shifts, I always had occurrences that made me feel like I was going to be attacked by either an animal or a person. We would hear hissing sounds and groans. Sometimes there were glowing eyes, either red or white in color, but larger than any area wildlife. These could be seen from behind the bushes or top of the tree canopies. But what stuck with me were the shimmering humanoid shapes. The shimmering was otherworldly. The way I always described it to my family and a few of my friends was like that of the predator when the alien cloaked itself. My first work firearm was an older Smith & Wesson semi-automatic single stack. That was my dad's when he worked for the local police department. But I still felt defenseless. I watched this shimmering silhouette crawl on the asphalt over the toll booth. After that, it appeared to stand upright and extend a long waving arm. This looked like an entity between the physical and the incorporeal realm. As I shifted my weight to get a closer look, I was struck by the glowing reddish eyes. I then watched as the entity jumped to a tree no less than 20 feet away. From here, the entity jumped again. This time, a broken branch fell from the tree, creating a loud crash. The entity looked back one last time before going over the gate and disappearing into the park. In May of 2022, an older coworker and I ran into each other at Walmart. We decided to go to a nearby diner and talk about the old days. During the conversation, he asked if I ever saw the predator and its camouflage at the Seven Falls. My blood ran cold. He then proceeded to tell me about his experiences on the shift that I'd never heard. After leaving the diner and arriving home, I sat in my driveway for a moment, contemplating what inhabits that park. So I looked into the distance between the Broadmoor Seven Falls and Pike National Forest, and it's about an hour and a half north-south, pretty much straight, with Pikes Peak right in the middle almost. Which, ironically enough, is a dump. There is a deep underground military base installation in that area. Are these Glimmermen coming from deep underground military installations? I think so. I really do. And look, it all comes back to those. It all comes back to the agenda, the alien agenda, and this one world government. I don't believe humanity had any involvement in the creation of Dogman. To me, that is absurd to think, because prior to humans even having the ability to create anything substantial enough to create a laboratory like that, there was hieroglyphs of humans fighting these things thousands of years ago. So I think that the aliens, or they came with the aliens, I don't know, or they are the aliens, who knows. But yeah, real interesting that right now we're back to a deep underground military installation. That's scary. Let's get into today's fourth encounter. Today's fourth encounter. This experience happened 4 years ago in the summer of 2020, deep in the spruce forests of coastal Alaska. On the weekends or after work in a long Alaskan days, I would pack a backpack and head out to explore this beautiful state. In the early September of 2020, I decided to explore an area I had driven past but actually had never hiked. There aren't any trails in this area, and it's not the easiest place to get to, so I didn't expect to see much out there except for maybe a moose or perhaps a fox. That being said, moose can be aggressive sometimes, and coastal Alaska is known for wolves, coyotes, wolverines, black bear, and brown bear. So I brought my Taurus .44 Magnum revolver. I'd been my companion on many hikes, and though I'd never fired at anything except paper targets, it made me feel more secure. Most wild animals, even bear, can be scared off by shouting and aggressive posturing. They're generally not looking for a fight, with something ready to fight back. Usually, they're pretty peaceful as long as you don't surprise them, come between them, and kill them or go near them when they have their young. All the same, it's better safe than sorry, and there are other things that you can run into when you're deep in the wilderness, away from any help, more cunning and more dangerous than wild animals. Today, just remember that line, man. This guy knows what he's talking about. Today, I was headed for just that place. To reach it, you have to cross the river, and the only way to do that safely is via the railroad bridge. You're not supposed to walk across there, but as long as there are no trains coming, I figured no one would care, since it's in the middle of nowhere. Next to a state forest, I was headed to a native Alaskan hunting ground, though only my friend, who we will call Jack, had been out there. I parked my truck off to the side of the road, hiked to the trail that leads to the bridge, and slipped down it quietly in an early morning. As I crossed the bridge, a strange feeling of unease began to tug at me. Everything seemed normal. I hadn't seen, heard, or smelled anything strange, and it was a bright, sunny Alaskan day, about 60 degrees. Absolutely perfect weather for hiking. I chalked it up to being nervous about being seen crossing the railroad trestle and pushed down the nervousness. It's easy to see that this bridge was not made for foot travel. There are no walking lanes for humans, and the old rotting timbers of the railroad ties 9 to 10 inches apart. Many are so rotted that I wasn't sure they could hold my weight. My feelings of uneasiness grew as I slowly picked my way across the bridge, realizing that if a train happened to come by, I would need to jump 20 feet down into the freezing water below to avoid getting crushed. Not many trains go through this section of line, though. But for any reason I wanted to beat a hasty retreat, there's no way I could cross this bridge in a hurry while being safe. Again, I pushed down my uneasiness, told myself to focus on the beautiful spruce on the other side of the river, and before long, I disembarked onto the other side. A small creek flowed into the river not far from the bridge. My spirits started to rise as I waded across and moved along the riverbank. As soon as I reached the other side, I found moose track, more than any I had seen concentrated in one place before. Big ones, little ones, medium size. I counted at least 8 different moose that had been through this area in the past few hours. I continued along the riverbed, finding more tracks now, with bear and wolf tracks crisscrossing as well. The sheer volume of fresh tracks from large wild creatures was beautiful to see, but also reminded me of just how alone I was and how large wildlife can be out here. I came upon a set of tracks that made me pause, heading in the same direction I was walking, only a few hours old, were tracks of a large mama bear with 2 good-sized cubs. I decided only to walk another 100 yards or so down to the riverbed before turning into the deep evergreen woods. Checking my compass, I took a reed, picked a tree to aim for, and repeated the process. As I stepped underneath the dark green canopy, the air became suddenly still, the pine needles covering the ground dead in the sound of my footsteps, and the thick evergreen boughs covering everything in the refreshing shade. Breathing in the good green smell, my spirits once again began to rise as I trudged off into the forest. After a good stretch of relatively easy hiking, the forest began to grow closer together. More fallen trees and undergrowth blocked my path. This slowed my progress and reduced my visibility down to about 5 feet ahead. Still, I knew I must be getting close to the hill that was my destination, so I pushed on excitedly. Climbing over a large fallen tree and jumping down on the other side, my boots clicked as I landed. Looking down, I found myself standing on bones of several large moose. Now, moose out here can get enormous. A big bull getting over 1,800 pounds is not unheard of. Now, not many things will mess with such a large, strong, aggressive creature, as they will fight back ferociously if cornered. Yet here I was, on bones of 3 large moose. I had no idea what could kill something this powerful and strong. Even large predators tend to avoid them when they are fully grown. And it could not have been disease or accident, because all the remains were piled together. A poacher, perhaps, but the antlers and skulls were still there. Some people hunt only for meat, but a moose this big would give you 500 pounds of delicious red meat. Who would possibly need to down 3 of them? Eventually, as I started to calm down, I realized that who or whatever had done this is probably no longer in the area, as these moose looked to have been dead for a few years. A pack of wolves or coyotes could have easily stripped the meat from the bones left behind by another predator. Taking heart in all that, I pushed on, and in a few minutes I found myself stepping into a wide, circular clearing filled with blueberries. Wild blueberries are a favorite snack of mine, so I filled my canteen as I walked through the brush towards the hill I had been aiming for. Climbing up onto a nice sunny spot, I set down my backpack and decided to rest for a while and eat some long overdue lunch. I boiled some water in my canteen cup, cooked a pouch of ramen noodles with small pieces of beef jerky in it. Simple food, I know, but it's easy to carry and it fills you up after a long day of hiking. After my concoction and several handfuls of blueberry, I tipped my hat over my eyes, leaned back against an old stump, and closed my eyes and just enjoy the sounds of nature for a while. Everything was peaceful. Everything was calm. After all, whatever had killed those moose was long gone by now, perhaps happened years ago. I convinced myself it must have been a poacher, long gone by now. This was a peaceful place, a restful place. Just what I needed after a long week of work. I woke with a start, looking at the time, and realized I had been asleep for hours. The sun was already dropping behind the mountains. Crack! I heard loud snapping of sticks in the undergrowth. I realized that it must have been this sound that roused me from my nap. Placing my hand on my pistol, I quickly swung my pack on and started to head back to where I had entered the blueberry patch. I had marked the place with a large stick that I had placed in a tree. Finding it, I began to push through the deep undergrowth, again following my compass. The opposite back along the same route I'd used that morning. Suddenly, I froze next to a giant fallen tree with the bones of the 3 dead moose. Was what was a mutilated carcass of a baby moose. Its body had been ripped open. 2 of its legs were gone and the head was no longer attached. I stood frozen, realizing that whatever dragged this here had come while I was sleeping only a few hundred yards away. The moss and undergrowth there were so thick I couldn't see any tracks, but whatever had done this must have been dangerous. Cursing my stupidity at taking an unplanned nap, I came to a quick decision. The creek that I had waded and the river made a simple landmark I could not easily miss. If I left my route I had taken to get there and headed northwest, I should be back to the bridge more quickly. Glancing at my compass, I headed off in that direction. At first I made good time, but after a while I ran into deep undergrowth. Shortcuts make long delays. I quoted to myself, but by now I was committed, so I pushed on through the dense undergrowth. I knew I must be getting close to the river when suddenly I heard another loud crack and a crunching sound. Something very large was pushing through the undergrowth and not even trying to be quiet. Hastening forward, I suddenly came out of the trees along the banks of the creek. Crossing over, I turned west, still hearing whatever this enormous thing was crashing through the undergrowth behind me. The undergrowth across the creek was not as thick. Lots of small evergreen trees and fewer brush, so I could move more quickly. Behind me, I heard a splash. That thing, that enormous creature, had just crossed the creek hot on my heels. Glancing back, I could see the tops of small trees and saplings bending and waving as whatever this creature was pushed past them. I could feel panic building inside when suddenly I stepped out of the woods and I could see the bridge, only 20 yards away. Remembering how difficult it had been to cross, and with the last of the daylight swiftly disappearing, I decided to try and run, which was the worst decision I could make. Drawing my revolver and crossing myself, I whispered a brief prayer, all the while hearing this thing getting closer and closer. Aiming towards my pursuer, I forced my breathing to steady, cocked the hammer back, and summoned every bit of courage I had, roared back into the woods, but I was armed and not afraid to shoot. The sounds got near, even louder. I bellowed out, final warning. The footsteps stopped. Still, mostly hidden between the trees, I could see the figure, covered in thick brown fur, standing on two legs, towering well over 8 feet tall and wider than any man. It let out a deafening roar, deep and guttural. Focusing all of my willpower not to run, I aimed my .44 and fired. The bullet struck a tree right in front of this enormous creature of the forest and sent bark and bits of wood flying. The report echoed off the mountains when finally my tormentor turned and hurried off back the way it had come. A distant splash told me that it had crossed the creek again. Letting go of my breath I had not realized I was holding, I lowered my gun. As the adrenaline wore off, my hands and knees began to shake. My ears were still ringing from the blast of my hand cannon, and I removed the spent shell casing and replaced it with another. If that thing came back, I wanted all 5 shots ready to go. Holstering my gun, I made my way back across the bridge as quickly as I could, without slipping or falling. My beat-up old pickup had never looked so good or as welcoming and inviting as it did right now. As I started to drive home, I grew more calm and my mind started to race. What the hell was that thing that could move through the forest so quickly? What had the power to kill a moose like that? Why had it followed me for so long when it easily could have overtaken me? A Bigfoot? Maybe. I've always been a bit skeptical, but now I'm starting to question myself. The next day I wanted answers. Leaving my heavy backpack behind, I strapped my .44 back on and loaded my Marlin 4570 guide gun with the heaviest, most powerful, dangerous game load I could find. I headed back across that bridge, rifle in hand, making my way back to where I had the confrontation to search for tracks. There, on the banks of the creek, I found an answer that I had been looking for. Even with my rifle in hands, a knot formed in my stomach at the sight of what greeted me. Tufts of brown fur and huge tracks. Tracks so big that I could stand both my size 12 boot inside of them. Very canine looking. My jaw dropped. A creature this size I had not believed to ever exist, even in coastal Maine or on the island of Kodiak. I always figured tales of creatures this big were hunters spinning yarns. I decided to seek some advice from my buddy. Jack is a native Alaskan who has been hunting these woods for 50 years. He's told me stories of savage creatures that have grown larger than even the largest Kodiak out here. Mean, cunning, and huge. They kill for fun, for the fun of it, not for food. They've been seen killing a newborn moose calf, ripping them to shreds, running off after another without even eating it. The thought of what I had been facing sent a chill down my spine. Sometimes locals have knowledge that you won't read about in school or see on any nature documentaries. Sometimes creatures go very wrong, and we just don't understand why. If you're ever going to explore Alaska, stay on well-traveled trails, unless you are ready to deal with the savage things that stalk our forests. It's safer to go in groups, and if you want to come home from your adventure, remember to stay alert and stay packing. All right, guys, today's fifth and final experience. I shared this experience maybe 5 or 6 months ago on a live stream, but it's an absolutely horrific experience. My mom and I traveled to Oxford, Ohio for a long weekend in the secluded cabin near Houston Woods State Park that'll forever change our perception of reality. The owner had remodeled the cabin several months before. The cabin was built into the side of a hill with a garage constructed underneath. It was equipped with a screened deck that from the outside looked as though it was off the second floor, but actually it was off the main floor of the residence. The deck held a table and chairs as well as a generously sized hot tub. The way the deck was lifted, we had a beautiful view. I turned the jacuzzi on to get it warmed up and ready for us to enjoy. I was in the hot tub while my mom was sitting at the table. My mom held her finger up and said, "Do you hear that?" I didn't hear a thing over the bubbling water. Mom used her phone light to look around and didn't see anything in the dark of the night. A few moments later, I got out and dried off and sat at the table with my mom and drank some cocoa. Mom seemed a little anxious and was looking around nervously. I asked her what was wrong. She shook her head, saying the forest sounds just kind of stopped. "Oh my gosh, you're right," I replied, as I realized no longer heard crickets or frogs chirping. After an hour or so, we decided to go to bed. The next day, we decided to explore the area around the cabin and noticed the ground was damp from the overnight shower. We walked about 100 feet or so from the cabin, and Mom noticed 2 strange footprints having 3 toes. She pointed it out. They were a couple of feet away from each other. We spent another hour looking around and headed back to the cabin for lunch. That night, as we enjoyed the hot tub, we heard a loud screeching sound come from somewhere outside the cabin. I jumped up and turned out the light on the deck so we couldn't be seen, and we would have a better view. Mom shut off the hot tub so we could hear better as well. Soon we heard branches breaking and other movements, but the strangest part was the sounds were coming from the forest's canopy, not from the ground. It sounded as if something heavy was climbing a tree not far from the cabin. We both stood back against the wall close to the door that goes inside. We could hear something very big, but we couldn't see a thing. As we were getting ready to go inside, we saw a set of yellow glowing eyes looking at us, branch level with the deck, 30 feet away. We ran inside and slammed the door, praying that we were safe. Not sure if we should call anyone, we decided to sit inside after making sure the doors were locked. We stayed up for another hour or so and didn't hear anything, so we eventually went to bed. The next morning after breakfast, we went outside to look around the cabin where we thought the noises were coming from. Other than a few large branches laying on the trail, we didn't see anything out of the ordinary. We decided to go on with our day and drove over to the lake after some more sightseeing and dinner. We went back to the cabin and went back to the deck, played some cards over coffee. It was dusk, so we could still see a fair distance. As we were talking, Mom noticed everything had gone quiet again. She asked me if I noticed the natural sounds had stopped, and I realized that Mom was right. Soon the sound of branches breaking started again, and this time it was moving closer. Turning out the light and watching the trees as the noises got closer, we were shocked at what we saw. The branches were moving as if something large was on them, but it didn't look like anything was there. But then we got a glimpse of what we had been hearing. In the trees was what looked like a large human shape, nearly invisible. It looked like it was moving, like a moving heat wave shaped with like a tall person. We watched in disbelief as this large entity moved through the trees. We didn't want to move, so it wouldn't see us, not knowing its intentions. After a few moments, it had moved away from our location. We waited a couple of minutes after not hearing anything and stepped inside. We discussed leaving that night instead of in the morning, but it was getting late, and once we packed everything up, it would be dark, so we stayed until morning. We gathered all of our belongings so everything would be ready to go in the morning and went to bed. I woke to use the bathroom at around 4 a.m. As I was on my way back to bed, I heard sounds like loud footsteps. Still being kind of groggy, I was trying to decipher where these steps were coming from, and I realized they were coming from the roof. I ran in and woke my mom up, whispering what I had heard. We sat on the couch, quietly praying and talking until morning light. When I peeked outside after not doing anything for some time, I saw nothing around, so we quickly grabbed our belongings and ran for the car. As we were getting in the car, I saw dirty three-toed print on the hood of the car. As I drove away, I looked toward the back of the cabin and saw a creature's yellow eyes staring back. I drove as fast as I possibly could, as safely as I could as well. I've done some research once settling back at home, trying to find some answers to what we had witnessed, and found several reports from all around the United States and other wooded areas of similar being that had been dubbed the Glimmer Man, the title referring to the odd, nearly invisible quality of this creature. This was definitely a trip that I will never forget. So, yeah, I think these things, the crawler, these glimmer-like creatures or predator-like creatures, I think they have like an alien genetic to them, obviously. It makes more sense than an animal human, alien human or alien animal. Who knows? Today's final bonus encounter. This experience was shared with me probably a year ago by a United States Border Control agent who wanted to remain anonymous. Some of the experiences he had shared was working on the southern border were interesting, including some Bigfoot type encounters, but the first incident he experienced was with a Dogman. This occurred while he was still training on his job. It really shook him because he had never seen anything like it before. He drove around with a senior coworker, a field training officer. They were in their Ford truck driving around, showing him checkpoints, hotspots, where they'd usually find people illegally crossing. I believe he was working 10 to 12-hour shifts. This was at the Arizona-California border, where it intersects with the Mexican border. One night, while he was still fairly new, this person had actually had a cold and wasn't feeling well. They were traveling on a dirt road, which was part of the normal routine. They didn't see any signs of people, which they thought was a little odd, because he says he always sees trash, water bottles, or clothing, or something else out there. They got to a turnaround and flipped on their spotlights and didn't really see anything. As they were turning around, the headlights and spotlights illuminated something in the distance. The training officer looked over and said, "Oh, that's probably just a wild animal." We should go and take a look. They got closer, and I guess at this point, the terrain got rough, so he drove forward slowly. While observing this creature, they could tell that it had dark black fur, but weren't sure what they were looking at. Maybe we should just leave it alone. He was really urging the training officer that they should get out of there, but his response was, no, we need to check this out. Then it clicked with the training officer that something wasn't right. It looked like a bear hunched over while eating something. They got within 30 yards of it, a good distance, but still close enough that they could see what was going on. At this point, they flipped on another set of bright lights on the light bar. This creature lit up too. It stood up. He thought it was a giant man with a fur coat. But as it turned around, he noticed that it had the head of a dog, and like a wolf's head. It was all black, and you could see its eyes. The eye shine was reflecting this embered tint. It was very muscular and had broad shoulders. It was far too large to be a wolf or a dog. Then it stood on its hind legs. He immediately stopped the truck. They watched this upright canine look at them. After several seconds, this Dogman eventually took a few steps forward. Then it took another step, and it was closing the distance. It wasn't walking fast, but its strides were huge, and it was getting closer and closer. He threw the truck into reverse. The Dogman opened its mouth a little bit and hunched over like it was sizing up prey. He quickly turned the truck around and drove away from the creature. He looked in the rearview mirror, still seeing the Dogman illuminated by the rear taillights. He said he had never seen anything like that, and it scared the absolute shit out of him. They directly drove back to the station. His training officer said that it was just a big dog, but don't talk about it to anyone. They didn't mention it to anyone in their nightly report. Occasionally, you'll pick up migrants that will talk about Lobos or the big hairy man and or strange stuff like that in the desert. All right, guys, 6 just absolutely terrifying experiences. That Alaskan one, whew. And then the connection with the Colorado Glimmerman, and possibly a connection to the deep underground military base installations. Really is an eye-opener. Anyway, with that, I'd like to thank you all for supporting the channel. It is your support, after all, that helps this channel to continue to grow and go. And honestly, what makes it a place where people can share their experiences, ideas, and theories, judgment, and ridicule-free. Thank you. Everyone, please stay safe, happy, healthy, and ever vigilant, keeping an eye on our children, our pets, our family, and friends. These creatures are real. They're out there, and they are dangerous. Share this information with the people that you love and care about, and it may just help save their lives someday. Until next time, never stop asking questions, never stop searching for answers, and God bless you all.